They say silence can be louder than thunder when truth is revealed in the most unexpected way. Imagine this, a hall filled with people of wealth, power, and influence, where every man and woman thought they belonged to the higher circles of society, and yet a simple test was about to strip away the masks of pride. Before I take you inside this unforgettable moment, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen a time when the one least expected to shine became the brightest star of the night? If you stay with me till the end, you will see how a single answer in Arabic, given not by a scholar, not by a businessman, not by a wealthy guest, but by a humble maid, changed the way everyone looked at her forever. And before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our growing community, because stories like these remind us that true value lies not in appearance or wealth, but in wisdom, humility, and strength. Now, let's step into the hall of the Sheikh, where the test began. The grand room was filled with expensive carpets, golden chandeliers, and whispers of superiority among the guests. The Sheikh, a man respected across nations, sat calmly in his chair, his eyes scanning every face with a mixture of curiosity and authority. He had gathered not only friends and associates, but also people who had come to impress him, to gain his favor, to be part of his inner circle. Yet, none of them knew that the Sheikh had prepared something unusual that day. Instead of speeches or displays of wealth, he wanted to test knowledge, humility, and understanding. And for that, he chose the language most dear to him, Arabic, the language of his ancestors, the language of the Quran, the language that represented dignity in his eyes. He cleared his throat, and a hush fell over the crowd. With a gentle but commanding voice, he asked a simple question in classical Arabic. The words rolled out like a melody, but in the silence that followed, not a single guest spoke. Eyes darted left and right. Nervous smiles spread across faces, and yet nobody had the courage to answer. They had dressed in their best, worn their most expensive perfumes, and carried themselves with pride, but at that moment, all that glitter faded. The Sheikh repeated the question, slightly slower this time, scanning the crowd. Still, no answer came. And then, from the corner of a room where the servants usually stood quietly, a voice rose. It was soft, respectful, but steady. It was the maid. Every head turned in disbelief as she recited the answer with perfect fluency, her Arabic flowing with grace and precision. The silence that followed was unlike any before. The air inside the grand hall became heavy after the maid's words echoed clearly. For a moment, it felt as if time had frozen. The guests, who only moments ago had been whispering with arrogance and confidence, now stared wide-eyed at the woman who usually walked quietly with trays of tea and plates of food. Their surprise was not only because she spoke, but because she spoke better than any of them could have. Her pronunciation was flawless, her rhythm natural, and her confidence unshaken. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, ashamed at their own ignorance, while others tried to force a smile to hide their embarrassment. The Sheikh's eyes, however, lit up with something far deeper than surprise. It was pride, not in himself, not in the wealthy crowd before him, but in the humility and strength of someone society considered the lowest in the room. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on his cane, and asked her another question, this time more difficult. Again, she responded without hesitation, her voice carrying wisdom that no expensive jewelry or fine clothing could match. The silence grew thicker, almost suffocating, because with every answer she gave, the truth became clearer. None of the wealthy guests could respond, but the maid, the one who cleaned after them, who they barely noticed, was the one holding the treasure of knowledge. And knowledge, the Sheikh knew well, was worth more than gold. The crowd began to feel restless. Some of the younger men exchanged awkward glances, their pride bruised, while a few women covered their mouths in disbelief. One man coughed loudly, as if trying to break the silence that had become unbearable. Another muttered under his breath, "Impossible." But even his denial could not erase the fact that the maid had just revealed herself to be more learned than all of them combined. She did not boast, she did not smile with arrogance. She stood humbly with her hands folded, her gaze lowered out of respect. The sheikh finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. Do you see, my friends, what happens when pride blinds the heart? You come here with jewels on your necks, yet without the jewel of wisdom in your hearts. You wear silk and gold, but she wears humility and carries truth. His words struck like lightning, shaking the very foundation of the guests' self-importance. And in that moment, many of them realized something painful. They had mistaken wealth for greatness, but greatness had been standing in the room all along, disguised in the form of a maid. The maid herself trembled slightly, not out of fear, but out of the weight of attention suddenly placed upon her. She had never sought recognition, never wanted to embarrass anyone. She simply respected the sheikh's words and answered truthfully. Yet, her humility only deepened the lesson the sheikh had been trying to teach. The audience now sat in silence, so profound that even the sound of the fountain outside the hall could be heard. Some lowered their heads in shame, others in thought, and a few even in admiration. For the first time, the hall, usually filled with loud conversations, laughter, and displays of ego, was wrapped in quiet reverence. The sheikh smiled gently, not at the guests, but at the maid, as though silently telling her that her light had finally been seen. And in that silent acknowledgement, the entire balance of the evening shifted. The sheikh leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the maid, and then he did something no one expected. He asked her to step forward. The room gasped softly as the young woman walked slowly, each step echoing louder than the previous, as though the marble floor itself wanted to amplify her presence. She stopped respectfully in front of the sheikh, lowering her head, unsure if she had done something wrong. But the sheikh extended his hand and said, "Raise your face, my daughter." That single word, daughter, sent shivers through the room. None of the noble guests had ever been addressed so tenderly by the sheikh. Yet here he was, giving honor to the one person they had overlooked. The maid hesitated, then lifted her gaze, and the sheikh asked her yet another question, this one drawn from deep poetry in classical Arabic, verses most scholars would hesitate to interpret. Without a flicker of doubt, she answered, not only translating the meaning, but also explaining its depth with clarity. Her voice was steady, like a calm river flowing with certainty. At that moment, even the most arrogant guests realized something that burned painfully in their pride. While they had spent their lives chasing appearances, she had embraced substance. While they memorized faces and names, she had memorized wisdom. And that wisdom now stood taller than all their riches. The sheikh clapped his hands once, a gesture both soft and powerful, and his laughter broke the silence. Not mockery, but joy. "Do you see?" he said, turning his eyes to the guests. "Do you see what honor truly looks like? Not in jewels, not in titles, not in empty pride, but in knowledge, in humility, and in truth. She is a maid by the work of her hands, but she is a queen by the wealth of her heart." His words struck every person like a hammer to the chest. Some shifted uncomfortably, others lowered their heads in shame. One older man, known for flaunting his fortune, began to sweat profusely, realizing that all his years of arrogance had amounted to nothing in the presence of true wisdom. Yet the maid stood silently, neither smiling proudly nor showing any arrogance. Her silence itself was powerful, showing that she never wanted to overshadow anyone. She simply carried the truth within her. That truth now illuminated the room brighter than all the chandeliers combined. From the far end of the hall, a young man finally broke the silence. "But Sheikh," he stammered, "she is only a maid. How could she know more than us?" His voice trembled, caught between disbelief and envy. The Sheikh's gaze hardened, and his words became sharper. "And it is because you think like this," he replied, "that wisdom has escaped you. You look at her and see only her position, but you do not see her discipline, her dedication, her nights spent in study while you wasted yours in games and vanity. You think status makes you superior. But in the eyes of Allah, in the eyes of truth, status means nothing if the heart is empty. Today, she has shown what you cannot. Learn from her or remain in darkness." The young man lowered his eyes, ashamed, unable to respond further. The hall remained frozen in awe, each guest quietly replaying the moment in their minds. Some were angry at themselves, others deeply inspired. But none could deny the fact that the maid had risen above them all, not because she sought recognition, but because truth has a way of revealing itself when silence falls. She looked at the Sheikh with respect, whispering softly, "I only answer because your question deserved respect, my master. I did not mean to take away anyone's honor." The Sheikh shook his head and smiled. "You did not take their honor. You only revealed it was never there to begin with." The words sank deep into every ear, and for the first time, the guests who prided themselves on wealth realized they had been humbled by the one they considered beneath them. The Sheikh's words echoed like thunder in the minds of those seated, yet his tone had been calm, almost fatherly. The lesson was clear, but the sting of it still weighed heavily on the hearts of the proud. Many of them could not bear to look at one another, and some quietly shifted in their seats, wishing they could disappear into the silence. For years, they had thought of themselves as the chosen ones, the favored by fortune, the worthy companions of the Sheikh. But tonight, one maid had unraveled the illusions they had built around themselves. What unsettled them most was not only her knowledge, but also her humility. She never once lifted her chin in pride, never once gloated over their failure. Instead, she remained standing quietly, as though she were nothing more than a vessel through which truth had flowed. That humility pierced their egos more than any arrogant laugh ever could. The Sheikh then turned his full attention to the maid. His eyes, filled with kindness, studied her face as though searching for the depth of her soul. "Tell me," he asked, "how did you come to learn what even these men and women could not answer?" The hall leaned forward, curiosity burning, and for the first time, the maid spoke more about herself. Her voice was soft but carried strength that years of hardship had carved into her. "Master," she said, "I was born into poverty. I could not afford teachers, nor books beyond a few worn pages. But I loved the language of my faith, and every night after my work was done, I would sit by a small lamp and repeat verses until they stayed in my heart. I listened to the recitations of elders, I memorized proverbs, and whenever I cleaned the library of a wealthy house, I would read quickly before I was chased away. My heart longed for knowledge, and though the world gave me little, I gave my time, my effort, and my patience. That is all." Her confession struck deeper than any lecture. Many of the wealthy guests suddenly recalled their own wasted nights, their endless hours spent in gossip, luxury, and indulgence, while this maid, who had nothing, chose to feed her soul instead of her pride. Tears welled in the eyes of an older woman seated near the front. She whispered to herself, "We had every opportunity, and yet we squandered it." The Sheikh nodded slowly, his voice rising again. "Do you see, my friends? Opportunity means nothing without discipline. Wealth is wasted when the heart refuses to learn. She has shown us all tonight that greatness does not ask for riches. It asks for hunger, the hunger for truth." His words carried such weight that many in the hall felt as though they were being carved open, their excuses stripped away, leaving only the raw truth of their negligence. And then, as though to test the sincerity of the moment, the Sheikh asked the maid a final question, one so intricate, layered with classical Arabic expressions and wisdom, that even seasoned scholars would have struggled. The crowd held its breath, expecting her to falter. Yet, once again, she answered with precision, not rushing, not hesitating. Her voice was calm, weaving meaning with grace. When she finished, silence swallowed the hall completely. No coughs, no whispers, no shuffling of feet. Only silence. A silence that was not empty, but heavy, filled with the realization that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The Sheikh rose from his seat, something he rarely did in front of guests, and walked toward her. Every eye followed, hearts pounding, breaths caught. When he stood before her, he placed his hand gently upon her shoulder and said, "From this day, you are no longer to be called just a maid. You are my daughter in knowledge and honor, for you have shown tonight what none of them could. Let them learn from you." Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves crashing on stone. Some guests bowed their heads in respect. Others struggled with their pride, and a few even wiped tears from their eyes. The maid herself stood trembling, overwhelmed not by pride but by gratitude, whispering, "I am not worthy, master." But the Sheikh's firm, gentle reply silenced her. The worthy never think themselves so. That is what makes them worthy. And once again, the hall fell into silence. But this time, it was not the silence of shame. It was the silence of realization, of respect, of awe. The maid had not only answered questions, she had changed the hearts of everyone present. The hall remained quiet, but this time the silence was not born of arrogance or embarrassment. It was a silence soaked in humility, reverence, and reflection. The once proud guests now saw the maid not with the eyes of superiority, but with the eyes of respect. They no longer saw just a servant carrying trays of food or scrubbing floors, but a woman who had risen above circumstances through perseverance, hunger for knowledge, and unwavering humility. For the first time, the jewels around their necks, the silk robes on their bodies, the perfumes that had seemed so important before, all felt hollow, meaningless, and small. The Sheikh looked across the hall and said firmly, "Tonight, each of you must remember this moment. Do not return to your homes and forget what you have seen. Do not return to your lives thinking wealth will shield you from ignorance. You must learn. You must humble yourselves before wisdom, no matter where it comes from. If you cannot respect those below you, then you have no right to lead those beside you." His voice thundered through the hall, and not a single person could resist the weight of his words. The maid stood quietly, her eyes lowered once again, not out of fear, but out of her own humility. She had not expected this attention, nor the Sheikh's honor, nor the guests' newfound respect. All she had ever wanted was to learn, to understand the language she loved, and to live truthfully. But tonight, destiny had pulled her from the shadows into the center of the light, and she could not turn away. The Sheikh turned back to her and said, "Your journey has just begun. Do not think tonight is your triumph. It is only the beginning. You must continue, and one day, you will be the teacher others look up to. Do you accept this responsibility?" The maid trembled, tears filling her eyes, but she nodded softly. "Yes, master," she whispered. "If it pleases Allah, I will continue to learn and to share what I know." The Sheikh raised his hand toward the guests, his voice echoing once more. "Let this be your lesson. Knowledge is not chained to wealth. It does not belong only to scholars with titles or leaders with power. Knowledge belongs to those who seek it with sincerity. If a maid can surpass you in wisdom, then perhaps it is you who must become her students." At that, the shame of the proud was complete. Some wept openly, realizing how empty their years had been. Others bowed their heads, committing silently to change. And a few, too stubborn to accept the truth, remained silent. But even their silence betrayed their defeat. The maid stepped back, returning to her place at the side of the hall, but in the hearts of all present, she no longer stood in the shadows. She was now brighter than the chandeliers, a living symbol of humility crowned by knowledge. The Sheikh returned to his seat, his eyes closing briefly as though offering a prayer of gratitude for what had transpired. Outside, the desert night stretched endlessly, stars sparkling in the sky above, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to the lesson that had been taught within the Sheikh's hall. And though words had been spoken and questions answered, it was the silence that lingered most powerfully, a silence that carried respect, admiration, and change. That night, many of the guests left with heavy hearts but lighter souls. Some returned home and opened the books they had long neglected, their arrogance broken. Others began to treat their servants with new respect, realizing that wisdom could dwell in anyone, regardless of station. And some would forever remember the look on the Sheikh's face when a maid answered him so perfectly, that look of pride, not in wealth, but in character. As for the maid, her life would never be the same. Though she would continue her humble work, those who had once ignored her now greeted her with respect, and whispers spread of the servant girl who had silenced the hall with the beauty of her knowledge. She did not chase fame, nor did she crave recognition. Instead, she continued what she had always done, studying by the light of a small lamp, memorizing, reciting, learning, and living with humility. And so, the lesson of that night became a story told across the land, passed down not as a tale of wealth, but as a tale of wisdom. A tale that reminded all who heard it that true greatness is not in crowns or riches, but in hearts that hunger for truth. A tale that showed how silence, when filled with respect, can be louder than the noisiest crowd. And if you're listening to this story today, let it be your reminder too. Never underestimate the humble, never despise the poor, and never think knowledge belongs only to the wealthy. For the maid's voice answered when no one else could, and silence fell. Not because of shame alone, but because truth had finally spoken. And before you go, if stories like this touch your heart, if you believe in the power of truth over pride and wisdom over wealth, then make sure you subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us share more stories that open eyes, soften hearts, and remind us of what truly matters. Subscribe now and join a community that values knowledge, humility, and the timeless power of truth.